Hi, I'm Dr. Wilson. I'm a PhD molecular biologist, and this week, I guess I'm talking about Aaron Rodgers. But let me just make a few things clear before I get started. I am not making this video to make fun of Aaron or shame him. I'm not about that here. Instead, I think that I get the vibe from Aaron that he's someone who has tried really hard during the pandemic to abide by the rules, but he has reservations about the vaccine that just weren't heard or addressed properly. And so then he felt like he was being shamed by his peers, and as a result, fell prey to misinformation. I don't blame him for that at all. So, unlike some other doctors that I debunk on this channel who should know better, I have sympathy for Aaron, and I'm going to approach it from that direction. Of course, I could be wrong about Aaron Rodgers here, but that's just my honest judgment of him as a person at this moment. With all of that said, I've been debunking COVID misinformation on this channel for almost 2 years now. I've had a finger on the pulse of all of the misinformation that goes around this whole time, pretty much since day one. And the things that he's been saying in his recent interviews are right in line with a lot of this misinformation that I've seen convince a lot of people, despite the science being there to sway them away from it. So since I'm giving Aaron the benefit of the doubt as being someone who is honest but genuinely misled, I figure I'll take this opportunity to address the misinformation that has convinced him, because it's probably the same misinformation that has convinced a lot of people who are not getting the vaccine right now. So with all of that said, let's get started.
It was simply the fact that I have an allergy to an ingredient that's in the mRNA vaccines. So on the CDC's own website, it says, should you have an allergy to any of the ingredients, you should not get one of the mRNA vaccines. So those two were out already. So my only option was Johnson & Johnson.
Okay, this is fair. I'm assuming he's talking about the ingredient in mRNA vaccines called PEG, or polyethylene glycol. This is a compound that's in a lot of products that lots of people use on a daily basis, actually. And in the vaccines, its purpose is to help stabilize the lipids that carry the mRNA to your cells. It's very rare to be allergic to PEG, but it does happen. So if he is allergic to it, then it would make sense for him to go for the J&J shot.
And then in mid-April, the J&J shot got pulled for clotting issues, if you remember that, right? So the J&J shot was not even an option at that point.
Well, that's not quite what happened. You see, after a vaccine goes to market and gets administered to millions of people, incredibly rare side effects that are, say, 1 in a million will only show up at that point. So there is very intensely close monitoring of how the vaccine is doing after it is rolled out into the general public, post-clinical trials. Thanks to this close monitoring, experts identified 6 cases of severe blood clotting issues after 6 million doses were given. So I'll say that again. At that time, it was 6 cases in 6 million doses. That's literally 1 in a million. And the pause was so that people could observe what happens to the population once the vaccine is paused, and it also gives doctors time to understand what the blood clot issue was so that they could better treat it. After this pause, J&J shots resumed, and the safety data looks really good. Yes, there are very incredibly rare issues that can occur from any medication, including vaccines, but they remain incredibly safe. So this is honestly not a good reason to say no to vaccination against COVID.
To my knowledge, there's been 0 long-term studies around sterility or fertility issues around the vaccines.
Well, Aaron, I hope you would be happy to know that we actually do have data on that. And they say that these vaccines don't affect fertility in men or women. Now, usually when people say long-term effects, they're thinking that there needs to be studies that go on for years and years. But that's not the case with vaccines, because almost every single adverse effect that a vaccine will cause will occur within 6 to 8 weeks of the dose being administered. We now have safety data for millions of people, and the first people who were vaccinated got vaccinated over a year ago, and there has been no evidence of any fertility issues. Scientists have looked for fertility issues and found no evidence of it. Women got pregnant during clinical trials over a year ago, and no issues were noticed then, and my own wife got fully vaccinated while 7 months pregnant, and we have a very healthy baby now who's growing faster than I can keep up with. there is just no evidence of any fertility issues at this point. So there's just no reason to be concerned because those problems should have shown up by now if they existed.
We don't know what the long-term effects of these are. There's still clinical trials going on through 2023. So
this is something I'm hearing a lot, and it's getting misinterpreted pretty heavily. It's true that if you go on to clinicaltrials.gov and look for COVID vaccine clinical trials, that their scheduled end date is 2023. However, this is so that they can monitor efficacy of the vaccines. In other words, they're asking the question, how long do these vaccines stay effective, and do we need to have boosters? In terms of safety of these vaccines, that's now handed over to post-market surveillance, where millions of people are being monitored instead of the 40,000 that are being monitored in the clinical trial group for long-term efficacy of the vaccine. And once again, monitoring of these vaccines have not found any issues that would justify refusing to get the vaccine.
but I think some of the rules to me are not based in science at all. They're based purely in trying to out and shame people, like needing to wear a mask at a podium when every person in the room is vaccinated and wearing a mask makes no sense to me.
So during this interview, Aaron talks a lot about the rules that he has to abide by in the NFL and says a lot that the rules don't really make sense to him and all this stuff. Now, I kind of get it. The NFL is not always going to enforce policies that are science-based. I mean, it's the NFL. Rather, they're an organization that are concerned with optics, public perception. That's all really important to them. So, yeah, they're going to enforce rules that are excessive. They're going to enforce rules that are excessive in order to look good. But these excessive rules do also decrease risk. So I can kind of see both sides to it here, but at the same time, it's really not that hard to wear a mask. So just go ahead and do it. And that goes for vaccinated people too, because as we'll get into later in this video, vaccines are very effective, but they're not 100% effective.
That I went out and on my own paid for and did research and went out and did an immunization protocol that's been used. Homeopathy has been around for centuries, and the doctors that I consulted with have been doing this for decades.
Okay, so this is the part of the interview that a lot of people seem to be talking about. Homeopathy is not going to immunize you against anything, because homeopathy is nothing. It's literally nothing. Seriously, for those who don't know, homeopathy is literally taking a substance and diluting it so many times that the final product is just water. It doesn't have a single molecule of the original thing you were diluting. It's just water. It's nothing. It's not medicine. It's not going to immunize you. It's not going to do anything for you. So, no, you're not immunizing yourself by doing homeopathy. Immunizing yourself means training your immune system to recognize something that it's never seen before but likely will encounter in the future. Homeopathy is not doing that. Only vaccines are doing that. Aaron Rodgers, to say that you're immunized, that's just not true. And I think you were probably really misled by the doctors that you talked to and consulted about this. So that's really unfortunate, but there's time for you to still turn it around. You can always get vaccinated. It's not too late.
What about my body, my choice? What about making the best decision for my own circumstance? And that health is not a one-size-fits-all thing. I think that's the thing that's most disappointing.
So what everyone needs to understand is that COVID is an infectious disease. It's something that is caused by a virus that transmits from person to person. So the choices that you make for your body and the choices that you make for preventing yourself from getting infected and spreading it to others, that affects others. Communicable diseases need community solutions. It sort of is selfish if you're refusing to participate in the communal effort to suppress the spread of a contagious disease for your own interests. But let's look at it from that angle. Let's look at it from the individual angle as well. If you look at the risk of what you would experience in a COVID-19 infection versus getting vaccinated, by every single metric, COVID infection is far riskier than COVID vaccination. Any documented adverse event that has been noticed with COVID vaccines is much more likely to happen if you get infected by COVID itself. This is regardless of your age and regardless of your health. You are at risk if you get COVID-19, period. Getting a vaccine is much safer for you and for your community.
If the vaccine is so great, then how come people are still getting COVID and spreading COVID and unfortunately dying from COVID?
Because vaccines aren't 100% effective. Nothing is. That's like saying if Tom Brady's the greatest football player of all time, then why hasn't he won every Super Bowl? But seriously, these vaccines are incredibly good at what they were designed to do, which is prevent disease. But we'll get to that in a little bit.
If the vaccine is so safe, then how come the manufacturers of the vaccine have full immunity?
Well, they don't. This is another common one I see a lot. Vaccine manufacturers cannot be sued by ordinary citizens who think that they were injured by a vaccine. If this was allowed, then they would be swamped with so many lawsuits of people claiming that they were injured by the vaccine that they wouldn't want to make vaccines anymore. This is exactly what happened about 40 years ago when vaccine companies almost stopped making the pertussis vaccine. I've talked about this story before on my channel. I'll put a link in the description to an article that talks about it. But basically, a vaccine company can still be sued for fraud and negligence. For example, if they put out a bad, faulty product, then they will be held accountable, both in court and in the market, because nobody's going to want to take that vaccine, and they will be held accountable in court as well. So between potential federal lawsuits and having a product that they spent billions of dollars testing and manufacturing being now useless to them, there's a lot of incentive for vaccine companies to keep their products safe and effective. Does that mean we should trust them outright? No, of course not. The scientific community doesn't do that, though. The scientific community is extremely competitive, and they will pounce at any opportunity to tear down anyone else's work. Trust me. So we don't trust the pharmaceutical companies outright, we trust the science. And the science says that these vaccines are safe and effective.
I'm 48 hours in, and I consulted with a now good friend of mine, Joe Rogan, after he got COVID, and I've been doing a lot of the stuff that he recommended.
Okay, so this is another part of the interview that a lot of people are talking about. This means that Aaron Rodgers is taking things like monoclonal antibodies and ivermectin. One of those things is the most effective medicine we have against COVID-19. The other one is ivermectin. Ivermectin just doesn't work against COVID. Several groups have tried to test ivermectin in randomized controlled clinical trials to see if it has any efficacy, and they consistently find that it doesn't. It just doesn't have any effect. There was, of course, a lot of talk about some studies that showed ivermectin to be very, very effective, but it turns out that those studies are being retracted. Why are they being retracted? Well, a few reasons, ranging from the data were made up to the study literally never happened. Seriously. This is what the state of ivermectin data look like with those retracted studies taken out of the equation. There's just no benefit.
I'm going to have the best immunity possible now, based on the 2.5 million person study from Israel, that people who get COVID and recover have the most robust immunity.
Right, so this is something a ton of people are talking about right now. Is natural immunity better than the vaccine-induced immunity? Should people still get vaccinated even though they've been infected? So let me briefly touch on those points. So Aaron Rodgers brings up this study out of Israel apparently showing that people who were naturally infected with COVID had greater protection against a secondary infection than vaccinated people had against a breakthrough infection. However, similar studies have been happening elsewhere in the world, and the data are ending up being mixed, with some studies saying that natural immunity looks better, some studies saying vaccine-induced immunity looks better. It kind of looks like it depends right now on the population that's being studied and how well they're able to account for limitations. So on that population level, I think we need to see more data before we say anything conclusive about comparing these two on a population level. However, if we look at a mechanistic level, a cellular and antibody level immunity response, what do we see? Well, we see that infection-induced immunity and vaccine-induced immunity are both very, very robust for 6 to 8 months at least out from infection or from the dose. In both cases, we see a very robust immune memory that is able to quickly produce lots of antibodies and mobilize a lot of T cells in order to clear the infection. However, we also see that in some infected individuals, this protection can be sort of heterogeneous, to the extent where some people have almost no protection, while others have very good protection. Lastly, having natural immunity is definitely not the best immunity you can have. People who have been infected and then gotten vaccinated actually see a very significant boost to their immunity relative to people who do not get vaccinated. This immunity is so good that it can actually neutralize the SARS-1 virus that emerged all the way back in 2002. That's pretty good. I mean, that's really amazing. I don't know why anybody would not want to be able to have that powerful of an immunity against coronaviruses. So there is definitely a lot of benefit that an individual can gain after being vaccinated, even though they've been infected in the past. And that benefit is going to translate to a community level. Like I was explaining earlier, this is a communicable disease, so the better immune we all are, the better we'll be able to fight it.
The problem with this is it is so political, and health should not be political.
I totally agree. The politicization of the COVID pandemic has been ridiculous and has caused so much unnecessary death. It's extremely frustrating for a scientist to have watched. During this interview, Aaron Rodgers also says that politics is a sham and he doesn't want to go on CNN and Fox. I think that's great. I kind of agree. Politics sucks.
Has any member of the health staff this entire time got up and actually talked about real health? Have they talked about exercise, a healthy diet, like eating real food, drinking water, taking vitamins, vitamin D deficiency, and what that causes in the body? No, there hasn't been any of that.
Well, to be fair, health authorities have been encouraging people to eat healthy and get exercise for decades, but people don't really listen to that all that much. Also, Anthony Fauci has definitely talked about the importance of getting enough sleep, having a good diet, and all that stuff. So it's not like people haven't tried, it's just that this is not really a solution to an acute problem. In other words, improving the overall health of a population is a long-term project, and the pandemic is an immediate problem. You're not going to change the health of a vast majority of Americans in the span of a year. It's just not going to happen. You need other measures to mitigate the pandemic now. Also, what exactly would the public health strategy be there? Would the government mandate a certain amount of exercise per day, or put a cap on the amount of calories you can take in? I don't think people would take too kindly to the government telling them what they can do in those situations.
Again, healing people, there's not a lot of money in it.
This is another thing I hear all the time from people who just don't trust pharmaceutical companies. There actually is a ton of money in healing people. Cures are in high demand, so you can sell them at a big profit. Even if drugs are generic, like Aaron Rodgers mentions later in this interview, drug companies still make a ton of money off of them if people are buying them. And if COVID sticks around and you want to choose to take things like Ivermectin or the new pills that are actually effective, then that's more money in their pocket. But if we all vaccinate and COVID-19 rates go way down, or we don't have as much reason to treat people because not as many people are getting sick, then that's less money going the way of Big Pharma in the long run. So stick it to Big Pharma and get vaccinated.
But it's a virus of health, and the most important thing would be educating people on how to live a healthier life. That's how we can beat any type of disease.
Yes, it's very important to take care of your own health, but it's also really important to recognize that your immune system could very well have a very difficult time fighting something that it's never seen before. That's why immunization, vaccination, not homeopathy, is so important. This notion that you can beat all disease just by being healthy is unfortunately not true. I mean, I don't think that Aaron Rodgers, no matter how healthy he is, would be up for getting infected with Ebola.
The situation that I'm in should be a conversation, not a controversy.
I agree. I don't think you deserve to be shamed. I don't think you deserve to be ridiculed for not wanting to take the vaccine. I think that you should take the vaccine, and I think that you've been genuinely misled. I think that you have been told wrong things by doctors, both on the side of vaccination and on the side of not vaccinating. I mean, I don't blame you. It's tough to navigate information in this COVID pandemic where information is moving so fast and misinformation is moving even faster. So what I'd say to Aaron Rodgers and to all people who are thinking like him is that I get how it can be frustrating to feel like you are getting forced to take a vaccine that you don't understand. And I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean that based on what Aaron Rodgers said, he doesn't understand the vaccine. He has a lot to learn. And it's on the scientists, it's on the experts to teach him, not to ridicule him, not to shame him, but to actually listen and talk to him and say, I know that you think this because X, Y, and Z, but this is what the science says. This is what the science actually says. So that's the conversation that I think would be more useful to have, not whatever the media is doing right now with making these people feel like they're shamed or outed or just being forgotten about and not listened to. But also try to understand what it's like for people who are getting vaccinated. This pandemic has been tough on everybody. When we finally have a vaccine, multiple vaccines that are very, very effective, and we see that effectiveness today. We see that it actually is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, that most people who are getting sick, who are dying, who are getting hospitalized, are people who are unvaccinated. That means most of these deaths, hospitalizations, and illnesses are preventable, and it's frustrating to see a solution ignored. So with that, I just ask anybody who is still not vaccinated, hesitant, or just plain old refusing, be honest with yourself and identify the real reasons why you don't want to get vaccinated and earnestly seek out the answers. Don't just listen to the doctors you like. Don't just listen to a few experts. Do your best to listen to as many experts as possible. That's why I always put all of the links to all of the science that I talk about in all of my videos in the description below. That's including this one. And in the description of this video, I'll also put links to other scientists who are great communicators who will be able to explain this stuff better than I can. If you're serious about health and you care about your position on the vaccine, I implore you to check out those sources with an honest eye and try to learn something. Well, that has been my video on Aaron Rodgers. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I do not have a PayPal or Patreon or any way you can support me financially. Just give a like and subscribe to the video so you can catch me next week where I'll be debunking more funky stuff. See you then.